Fire Emblem is like school, it's nothing without classes. Sure, some are better than others, some are cooler than others, and some are more widely available than others, but the fact of the matter is that without classes, Fire Emblem wouldn't work. It may not always have been part of the formula to let you tweak and alter your unit's classes like a tactical sandbox, but the core concept has been ever present, and is one of the oldest staples in the entire series. But as is often the case, something having a rich and long history also means there are some peculiar sides to it. Call them growing pains, forgotten slip-ups or weird experimentation, but the class system too has produced some quite strange results over the years for sure. Let's start with what I would consider the perfect example of weird experimentation, the Transporter class found in the Binding and the Blazing Blade. It's exclusive to Merlinus in both games, and essentially makes him a walking, talking convoy. If deployed, he will sit at the back of the map in his tent or carriage, managing the convoy. This will allow you to automatically place any items you obtain when your inventory is full into the convoy, while otherwise one item would have ended up lost. In Binding Blade, Merlinus is counted like any other unit, and thus requires you sacrifice a deployment slot in order to station him. Since he cannot attack, he must either be defended or left to his own devices and hope for the best. Fortunately, if he falls, he'll just return in the next chapter, essentially making him the first ever example of casual mode in series history. Contrary to what you may think, Merlinus can actually also level up, with high growth rates in HP, speed and luck to help him survive any hits. In Blazing Blade, he can also promote, from a standard tent to a horse and carriage, increasing his movement. Blazing Blade also removes Merlinus as a normal unit and instead makes him a bonus that doesn't take up a deployment slot, which is definitely the right call. Since nowadays convoys can just be accessed at any time, which is significantly more convenient and player friendly, the role of the transporter basically doesn't exist anymore. And so I feel quite confident in saying we will never see another transporter again. Hell, I'm even quite curious to see what happens if the Elite games ever get remade. I wouldn't be surprised to see Merlinus' role altered, if not removed, simply because it's too inconvenient. But that's besides the point. Transporter is a class without equal. It's truly one of the strangest we've ever seen. A figment from a bygone era, essentially. And speaking of bygone eras, I want to look at the class that defines growing pains in the Fire Emblem series. As you might expect based on that, it's a class that is exclusive to the two Arcania games, Freelancer. While the name may draw up ideas of Marv hiring a graphic designer or accountant for his army, the reference to temporary work is definitely intentional. Although I think the name Chameleon, used in the European version of Shadow Dragon, is definitely a better choice. Anyway, this is a class exclusive to Zane and Zane alone, seeing as it has never appeared outside of Arcania. In everything but name, the class is a prototype version of the Dancer class, that I'm sure needs no introduction. It's kinda interesting how it's clear the developers kinda knew what direction they wanted to go with this, but also lacked the refinement that Dancers would end up having. Zane doesn't make one of your units move again, he transforms into that unit for 5 turns, meaning you now essentially have 2 of them. I've always found this a super interesting concept and idea, which has ton of potential even today, next to Dancers, but the execution leaves a lot to be desired. By far the biggest problem is that although Zane does copy stats, he cannot replicate the target's weapon level or inventory. That means that in order for Zane to actually attack, you need to give him the necessary weapons beforehand, severely hurting his adaptability, while his usually lower weapon levels mean he also has to use weaker weapon alternatives compared to the unit he just copied. Furthermore, he is locked into whatever he copies for 5 turns, hurting his flexibility even more, and when those turns are up, he instantly turns back, no matter where he's currently at. Flying over unwalkable tiles? Tough luck buddy, you're stranded now. In the range of an enemy you could take a turn ago, but will end you now. It was nice knowing you, Zane. Despite these severe flaws, I still think the Freelancer class is a very interesting idea that I wouldn't mind seeing revisited. But at the same time, we must also acknowledge that Dancers are easily the better and more convenient version of it, and if IS was gonna leave either of them behind, it had to be Freelancer. But at least that does immortalize this class, and Zane as a result, as one of the weirdest units in Fire Emblem history. Before we continue with the next class, I have a little fun fact. Did you know only one class has appeared in every single Fire Emblem game under the same name? Any guesses as to which one it is? 1, 2, 3. The answer is Sniper. Yeah, gotta be honest, I was a little surprised at that, with it being a promoted class and all. But the reason Sniper holds this title alone is because there is one game that doesn't have its pre-promoted variant, Archer, being Genealogy of the Holy War, which only has bow fighters instead. They're effectively the same thing, bow fighters and archers, and that's another thing that happens quite often in Fire Emblem. Classes that are essentially the same as classes we see in other games suddenly having different names. And yet, there is also a class that really would have benefited from slightly different titles, because now it is probably the most inconsistent class in existence. I'm talking about Emperor, which you're probably best familiar with because of Edelgard, who's the only playable character in the series to have access to it. Her variant uses predominantly axes, but way earlier in the series, this class had already appeared twice, both using different weapons. Hardin from Mystery of the Emblem is also an Emperor, but his version of this class exclusively uses lances. Arvis from Genealogy of the Holy War is also an Emperor, but he can use tomes and swords, meaning this one class has covered the entirety of the weapon triangle over the course of the entire series' lifespan. And while I of course understand this is all a result of these characters being given classes that fit their titles rather than based on gameplay precedents, the fact of the matter is that that same decision has never been made for other titles. Princess is a class only Celica and Lachesis have access to, despite Erica, Ivy and many more also being princesses based on title. The male variant Prince has only been used by Leaf and later as a green unit by Zephiel in Blazing Blade, and I don't think I have to tell you these are hardly the only two princes the series has ever seen. Same thing with Kings, yet grown-up Zephiel is the only character to ever have that as his class, when he appears as an enemy in Binding Blade. But enough semantics, you came for weird classes, so that's what you'll get. How about the Corsair, which appeared exclusively in the Blazing Blade? The entire purpose of this class seems to be nothing more than eye for detail. Gameplay wise, the Corsair is completely identical to a pirate, which you're probably more familiar with. They too use axes, they can traverse water tiles, they're the same thing. So then, why do they exist? Well, we need to look at the class description for that, which explains they are adept at fighting in lakes. And since the Linus version of Four Fanged Defense takes place near a lake instead of at sea, all pirates in this map only are of a different class known as Corsair. It is completely unnecessary, no one would have ever complained about this, but I still love it so much. It's a fantastic eye to detail, true dedication from the developers to make that distinction, even if it has resulted in a new class that has only ever appeared in one chapter. But what if I told you that it's not even the only class this applies to? In fact, our next entry isn't just exclusive to one chapter, it is exclusive to one generic enemy only. In Mystery of the Emblem, only the original, not the remake, Chapter 11, Unri's Way, contains one sole Berserker enemy. And unlike the Berserker that would end up a quite commonly seen playable axe-based class starting in Freyja, this Berserker uses a sword and is essentially an enemy version of the hero. In the remake he was replaced by a Swordmaster, making this probably the most niche class in the entire Fire Emblem series. So far we've mostly been taking the topic of the day from a gameplay perspective, but I also want to look at it from a different angle, one that focuses more on the in-universe weirdness. A perfect example of this are several of the DLC classes we've had over the years. Awakening introduced these and immediately brought along one class I personally wouldn't enlist in my army, the Bride. The class is similar to a War Cleric, using bows, staves and lances, but while a War Cleric sounds, very well suited to what we're dealing with here, I can't say the same for Brides. It does suit Heroes though, which is the only game it has since reappeared in and even has become a staple there, with wedding themed alts releasing yearly. Shadows of Valentia also introduced a slew of DLC classes, most of which were exclusive to the new Overclass mechanic, which wasn't accessible until you had reached level 20 of your standard advanced class. Most of these are absolute bangers, with especially Celica's very own Regain and the Yasha, the overclass version of Dreadfighter, being fantastic designs. Others, while cool, do have some weird dark undertones however. Take the Enchantress for example, the overclass of a priestess. Whereas that is quite a pure and clean choice of words, I would say, Enchantress feels a lot more mystical and spellbinding. Similarly, Falcon Knights become Harriers, which feel more like Dark Flyers with access to black magic and dark color schemes. Alm going from hero to conqueror is probably the most blatant example. Depending on how you interpret that, it could be considered quite the unfavorable title. I get that the intention is to tie Alm into Walhart, which is great, but at the same time I don't think it is a very suitable term for Alm as a character, even by the end of the game. I also want to briefly mention the Ollivantier, the overclass of the Bone Knight, which just broke my heart and gave me a dream I never knew I had. As you may be able to hear, English is not my first language, I'm actually Dutch. And in Dutch, an Oliphant is an elephant, so when I first read this word, I expected to see my unit riding on top of a freaking elephant and I was so excited. So yeah, that didn't happen, but now I know what I want from the next Fire Emblem game. I want my Elephant Cavalier, and I want it now. But speaking of my native language, it did allow me to spot an interesting reference in a class from a totally different game you may not have realized. Elfric's unique class in the Cindered Shadows DLC of Free Houses is Verraad, which is actually pronounced Verraad, and is the Dutch and German word for betrayal, referring to his character. And speaking of classes in different languages, I just felt I had to point out how cruel it is to give Alfred's unique class the name Avenir, which is French for future, considering that, he doesn't really have one. Engage does have some more DLC classes that really fit the bill of what we're looking for in this video though. Take the Enchanter for example, not to be confused with the Enchantress. This class uses knives and arts in battle, poorly might I add. But its main focus is the ability to enchant and boost items. It might very well be one of the most outright supporting classes we've ever had, since it doesn't even directly interact with any combatants, and yet it can be incredibly powerful depending on how you use it. You can pick a weapon from your convoy to power up, after which every other weapon on the map with the same name also gets buffed. And this lasts the entire battle, FYI. You have to be a bit smart about it and prepare beforehand, but if used correctly, enchanters can be absolute monsters. The other super unique class this DLC added is less amazing gameplay wise, but I love the concept nonetheless. The Magic Cannoneer adds firearms to Fire Emblem in a way that doesn't contradict the technology levels, by giving your units a magic powered handheld cannon. It uses unique ammo, cannonballs, meaning you cannot have any weapon proficiency with it, but it isn't needed for a bit of fun. The Magic Cannoneer has low movement but immense range, making it a very fun and easy class to add to your army. That is very reminiscent of the last class I want to talk about today. Because let's be real, you cannot end the video talking about weird classes in Fire Emblem without mentioning the Ballistician. This class hails and was most prevalent in Shadow Dragon and essentially is a portable ballista on the go. Every time I play Shadow Dragon, I really try to make one of the characters that have access to this class, Jake and Beck, work. But man, that is a challenge. I wanna like this class so bad, but it also plays so bad. Well, on paper it has the same limitations as the Magic Cannoneer from earlier, its stats are significantly worse, meaning that the damage output generally isn't worth it compared to a regular unit. It's a novelty class to give units with excellent stats and fun skills, which works in Engage as well as Fates, which brought it back as a DLC class as well, but not in Shadow Dragon, which is quite a rigid game. It makes it even more of a shame that it wasn't brought back in Mystery of the Emblem, as new Mystery of the Emblem does have some early sandbox elements, and could have made the Ballistician more fun to play around with. But anyway, I feel like that's a good endpoint for today, although there are definitely more bizarre classes in Fire Emblem to discuss. Which are your favorites? And what are your thoughts on the classes discussed today? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.